From KOB4, this is Eye on New Mexico.
Good Sunday morning. The end of the year is here, but before we look ahead to 2025, we sat down with Albuquerque Mayor Tim Keller to talk about the big things that happened in 2024. Thanks for joining us for Eye on New Mexico. I'm Griffin Rushton. So we're ending 2024. You're coming up at the end of your 7th year in office here as mayor of Albuquerque. Tell me, what are you feeling now as we come to the end of this year?
You know, this has been a real pivotal year. I think this is the year where we finally broke through some major barriers. And so it's these long-standing challenges, like the fact that we had no 24/7 place to drop off, the unhoused to get help. We have a long way to go on all sorts of things, but we broke through that one this year. Our crime stats, some of them actually started going down. Again, really the first time in a decade. We broke ground on the rail trail, a decade significant project. And the CASA police reform, we finally reached 99% compliance. So I think what we saw, look, there's a long way to go. There's no doubt, that's not lost to me, but this year was very different. Things finally actually started going the right direction.
Jumping to crime a little specifically, I was looking at APD's numbers. Slight decreases, as you mentioned, auto theft, shoplifting, some of those more property-based crimes. What do you make of those slight decreases? What seems to be driving those decreases?
Yeah, in general, if you look at half our crime categories are coming down, but again, from all-time highs, so a long way to go. But half also are going up. So we can talk about the challenges like broken windows and shoplifting. But the ones that are working, we know it's a combination of really 3 things. One, technology. We have invested $50+ million over the last 3 years in gunshot detection, license plate readers, cameras. This means we catch bad guys and we have cases to put them in jail. That's why our clearance rate is 95%. For the last decade, it was 50%. That meant you only had a 50% chance of getting arrested in a year if you committed a homicide. Now it's almost 100%. We will find you and we will put you in jail. But it's because of the technological support. It's also because of the civilians. Right now, we had our community safety department. They took 80,000 calls, so APD didn't have to take them. So in other words, it's the equivalent of getting more officers. We're freeing officers up to deal with violent crime, and we're having social workers or ACS deal with other issues like behavior and mental health issues. You also see this in crime scene investigators, PSAs, open space officers, transit officers. These are all forms of layered law enforcement, but they're freeing up our officers to actually fight crime. So that has been a tremendous help, and investigate crimes. So we think those are the 2 things really that are driving it, along with just good old-fashioned police work. You can't ever discount that.
So one thing we saw a surge of this year, and District Attorney Sam Bregman has really been speaking out against this, is teen gun crimes. I think in October he said there were at least 119 juvenile cases involving guns. What do you make of these numbers?
The challenge around the intersection of teens and guns has gotten way worse in the last year. And we absolutely have to update our criminal code. I think what's been highlighted by a lot of folks is that our state really has never adapted to the modern reality that, unfortunately, and these are other things I'd like to change too, but the access to automatic weapons is way too easy, even for teens. And a lot of this has to do with even social media and things like that. So that's happening. What does this mean? It means downtown, we've got teens taking pictures with ARs and drinking, doing drugs in parking lots. And so to deal with that, then there's always a fight or an argument and someone dies. That's what's happening. And so you've got to address each piece of that. So we're doing things like adding cameras in our parking garages and more lighting and having the police patrol inside parking garages. But we desperately need help. We can't do this alone. So yes, we've got to look at teen access to weapons. We've got to look at what happens when they're actually found guilty and they're 17, and then they get out 6 months later. That's the kind of stuff that the criminal code has to be updated to address.
I'm curious, when it comes to intervention in teens, do you think the city is doing enough to really meet with these teens one-on-one, get in front of them in schools to talk about how serious this issue is?
You know, the city in general, of course, we have no formal connection with the schools other than we're all in this community together. But we started a couple of things in the last 2 years. Number one is we are doing a version of outreach to teens with respect to the dangers of fentanyl and things like that. And a lot of people are like, oh, is it the DARE program? Well, it's a modern version of it. I mean, it's similar. And that is, I think, folks, so far it's been received very well. But we're doing something actually much more powerful at a couple of high schools, West Mesa and RFK. And I've talked to APS, and they're interested in having this in every high school, and so are we. And we actually are hoping the legislature will fund it in every high school. And it really should be all over the state, but it's called violence intervention. And it takes the kids that are already going down that dangerous path, and it intervenes through the actual school day curriculum. So they have a class called violence intervention. But in that class, we're unpacking what's driving it. Is it issues at home? Is it drugs at home? Is it just trying to pay rent? All of those things, and then we match them with services. So that student-based violence intervention program, we've seen grades improve at West Mesa. We've seen a huge, like an 80% drop in future criminal activity after that. That's what we need in every city in New Mexico, but also I think in every school in Albuquerque. So I just want to say, this is another example, like we have something that works. That's what changed last year. We've got to have it all over the city. That's what we want to do in the future.
So while we're talking about crime, let's talk about the Albuquerque Police Department. As you mentioned, a huge year when it comes to DOJ reform. I'm curious, when did you first find out that we had met all those requirements?
You know, I find out fairly in advance compared to most folks, but there usually is about a 3-month heads up that we get. And so, you know, these improvements are a reflection of really hard work in the last 5 years, especially our officers on the front line and the community to not give up on reform, to support reform, but also those officers to say, okay, we're going to work with this, the new policies, the new procedures, we're going to train on it, and we're going to own it. So we got that sort of attitude, I think, fixed about 3 years ago. And then we also did another thing. We said we're going to do reforms that make sense for Albuquerque and not just cut and paste like Portland or New Jersey, which is actually a huge issue. And once we started doing that, we created an ownership, but we also made it work for our city. So I think actually about last year, we realized like we're going to get through this. If we have the same leadership and the same approach, we're going to get through this. And so now we're 99% compliant, but we've got to be self-sustaining, they say, for about 18 months. So we're not done. And look, we're committed. These reforms are also going to stay. So that's clear too.
All right, so City Council, we know 2 of the proposed charter amendments did make it through to the ballot, and they were approved by voters. Tell me, what's your takeaway from how those discussions went to how voters responded to these changes?
Well, I think a couple of things. I think there's a lot of misconceptions about what those were for 2 reasons. One is, you know, I think, frankly, people are kind of using them for whatever they wanted them to be. They're very minor changes. And they ironically give both the mayor and city council more power over the police chief. It's both of us. It's not just one or the other. And, you know, that cuts both ways. I think it's a disincentive to be a chief. I think that's unfortunate. And it doesn't help with recruiting a chief. It also will inevitably lead to expensive payouts. So, you know, there were reasons why I didn't like it. But I will say this, it gave me more power, so that's true. But other than that, these actually didn't do hardly anything. So I think also the language on the ballot was super confusing. And, you know, at the end of the day, like, I actually wish I had seen that and edited it. I did not. But I don't even think people really knew what they were voting on. I mean, I got in there, and it was a double take for me to say, this is actually what it is, because they paraphrased it. And so it really didn't speak to any of the important nuances. And that's unfortunate. So I don't read too much into it, because I don't think people really knew, you know, what it was about. And that goes even for me when I walked in there. I had to really think about, okay, this is what passed, this is what didn't. I don't know what these words are on the ballot, but they don't reflect either of those things.
We saw some passionate exchanges this year between some city councilors and the mayor's office. How would you describe the relationship between the mayor's office and the city council as we wrap up this year?
You know, actually, I think on the big items that we vote on, our relationship is the same as it's always been. We have a natural tension between branches of government, and that's fine. And actually, we pass a budget that works, and we do the big things that matter. I think the rhetoric is really unfortunate, though. I think what we've seen is disrespect to professionals, not me. You can criticize me all you want, but when you have a police officer or when you have someone who's a clinical social worker and you just rake them to the coals and say they don't know what they're talking about, that's just wrong. And it also it's a massive disincentive for anyone to work at the city to try and help people. And so I hope next year we return to just a much more, let's respect professionals. That would be a great thing for everyone.
Still to come, the Gateway Center, affordable housing, that I-25 construction, and what's going on with the new stadium at Balloon Fiesta Park. We'll have more with Mayor Keller after a short break. After years of delays and shifting deadlines, Albuquerque's new Gateway Center entered a new chapter this year. City leaders helped unveil a 24-hour medical sobering center just a few weeks ago. And that's where we continue our one-on-one interview with Mayor Tim Keller. How are you feeling now that this project that we've been talking about for years finally has at least a big part to show for it?
Yeah. Well, one is just really a sense of fulfillment. In a sense, this is what I wanted to do. This is what we've been trying to do, and to finally see it happen. And that's what you want, right? That's why you asked for the job. And so for us now, there were 3 big gaps in our unhoused and housing system that we've had for decades. And one was transportation. You could never get transport from like a street corner to a shelter. Well, now we have that. That's the Community Safety Department. Second thing was, well, where can you go? That's open 24/7 with no barriers. That opened this summer. That's the 24/7 emergency drop-off. And then the other thing is, well, if we drop you off, how can you actually get help? And so now, actually, we have a place where you can actually detox, you can actually sober up, and you can get medical supervision. So we've plugged 3 massive gaps. The problem is there's 5,000 people unhoused on our street, right? So this is, again, an example of breaking through these longstanding barriers, and now we just have to do more. So instead of just 50 beds, we want to get that to 200 next year. Then we can actually take these meaningful chunks off the street and get folks help they need.
And we know really that the end goal for a lot of this is more housing, getting them in a home. Affordable housing has been a big conversation in the city, the state, really the whole country. And we know the first couple apartments at the first hotel to housing conversion opened this year. I'm curious, what else is the city working on to at least do its part to address affordable housing?
You know, it's a $20,000 housing gap, and a couple of years ago we started by changing the policies, and this is actually where council was very helpful, to convert hotels to apartments and office buildings to apartments and allow casitas. So we did that, and this year, unfortunately, we didn't see as much activity as we wanted to. So the city said, we're going to start doing this on our own. So we finished rehabbing one hotel and turning it into apartments. That's done, which is great to see. We're working on a second one. It's actually going to be focused on teenagers who are unhoused. And so that's the San Mateo Inn that we're now currently in the process of converting. But the biggest thing we need is these larger private-public partnerships. And so I'll highlight 2. There's one in Uptown that's called the ABQ Transit Center. That project is now funded, and it's about a $100 million project. It's hundreds of houses. It's actually not houses, hundreds of units, right, of apartments and condos. And so I'm hoping we're going to be able to break ground on that next year. That is a massive project. The other one is, you know, the biggest eyesore in the city is on Central and San Mateo. That old amazing Bank of the West building that is iconic and in so many pictures. That also is under contract for renovation. And so we're hoping to see construction on that this year. But those 2 alone are hundreds of new units. So we're going to keep trying, but yes, we need help. The city cannot solve America's housing problem by herself. And so we're really hoping the state can help in a massive way this year to the tune of hundreds of millions, because there is the excess money there to do that. And that's with the county and the state in cooperation. But sometimes you do have to throw money at the problem. And for housing, you can't fix housing without building housing, and that costs money. So this is one where we've just got to make the investment and make it big enough to matter.
We know this year has been a big focus on downtown Albuquerque. Are you starting to see the progress that you're hoping to see when it comes to downtown revitalization?
You know, downtown is another story where every mayor and council has tried to do what they can, and our administration's been no different. We've done a lot. We built a police station down there and all sorts of things. But this year we're on the cusp of something different. Depending on how council votes in just a few days, and when this airs, we may actually be giving giving downtown its own funding. This is this notion of a tax increment finance district downtown. That is something no one has done, and most downtowns across America have done. So if that passes, that actually also gives us transformational hope that downtown can actually change in a real, meaningful, powerful way, because we would be, in effect, putting hundreds of millions of dollars finally into downtown. And so that's the kind of game-changing effort I hope we're going to see in 2025.
One thing we talk about in our newsroom a lot is it seems no matter where you go in Albuquerque, something's under construction. A road's under construction, places are under construction. It can be quite frustrating for people who are dealing with this every day. What do you make of seeing so much of the city in this metamorphosis kind of phase?
You know, I think it is a reflection of that concept that I mentioned, that these are pivotal times in Albuquerque. And I have worked hard to pump hundreds of millions of dollars into infrastructure all over the city. But that also means you have to close roads for construction. And so I think, you know, there was this kind of buildup in the pandemic because things weren't happening, and then you sort of open the spigot back up and then you see everything happening. And so that's what we see all around us. But it's compounded by things like the interstate, which is a state project. But look, we need that too. Like, Jefferson absolutely has to be redone, and so does Montgomery. So I think these are things where you see what I saw back in the mid-90s. I was a kid driving to high school out on the west side, and we were redoing the Big I. And you would have thought the city was just a complete mess because it was so impactful and there were all sorts of other things around it. But wow, when that was done, it was like, wow, we grew up as a city. We took a generational step to like our future. And I think that's literally what we're in the middle of on almost every front right now.
A story we've been following this year is a lot of back and forth over a multi-purpose stadium, NM United, Balloon Fiesta Park. We've seen approvals, appeals all year. What do you make of this process that's now kind of about to stretch into its second full year?
You know, it's funny you mentioned second full year, and I always remind folks this is the 30th year. So I think it was Mayor Jim Baca. I don't know, we all lose track, but like this was tried once before downtown, failed. Neighbors didn't want it, or the pricing didn't work. I tried it 4 years ago downtown. Voters voted it down because of pricing and because they didn't like the downtown location. And I think what changed is I said, let's respect that. Let's find a way to do a stadium, because in general, people think we want a stadium. So let's find an alternative, and let's bring the team in as a partner, like a co-partner. In fact, they're doing most of the building because it's going to be their stadium, and see if that works. That's what we're on the cusp of. So it's another example of something that next year it's either going to happen or it's not going to happen. And I believe it will. And, you know, I respect that a few of those neighbors don't want it there, but I have to look at what's good for the city, and in many cases the metro area. And we all agree we need a stadium, and that is the most by far pragmatic and efficient place to put it. And so I hope that's why it's going to proceed next year.
We're going to take a quick break, but when we come back, we'll share what Mayor Keller had to say about a second Trump presidency and if he plans on running for a third term. Starting to look into 2025, we have a new president, well, new-ish president, coming into the White House. Just visited Albuquerque about a month ago. What did you make of his rally in Albuquerque? There was a little bit of drama with the city there, but what did you make of his remarks and kind of the energy that he brought here?
You know, I mean, I think in general, and we understand elections and we respect election outcomes. And it's something that all certainly do. And I think, you know, America spoke, and that's who they chose. And I think it shows a couple of things. Number one, I think it does show a real frustration with government's ability to deliver in our everyday needs, especially issues around pricing. You know, meaning like, look, inflation, but it's the cost of eggs that's skyrocketing, and it's the bureaucracy that I can't get anything done. So that's something I think that is all over America. And what we're trying to do in Albuquerque is demonstrate that at least we can be more responsive. So that's one of my goals. Whether it's a 311 call or it's a speed bump, we're going to try and give you a yes or no answer instead of no answer. And I think that goes to a lot of the frustration that's been mounting. Now, with respect to even pocketbook issues, we're trying to make sure all our city services are free. That's why we like free transit. That's why we have free access to pretty much everything in the city. It's why we don't raise prices at the zoo, things like that. So that's how we're trying to ease that pain a little bit. But I will say this, it's not going to get any better if there's tariffs that make everything more expensive. So yeah, I'm worried about costs skyrocketing because of this international policy that may be tried. And so I certainly have big concerns coming in. But the new president gets a chance, so we'll deal with those actions when they happen.
We know the city and the state have a nice working relationship with the Biden administration. We've benefited from the infrastructure bill. We benefited from the COVID relief money. Are we worried that federal relationship is going to change come 2025?
I think the relationship with the federal government always changes depending on the priorities of both administrations. And, I was mayor when Trump was here last time, so I've seen this show before, and I'll tell you the good things. We did much more at our VA. That administration was very helpful to our VA. And also we saw at least rhetoric around helping with fentanyl. And, even the vice president, these are issues that they have raised. And so, of course, had the Biden administration. But I want to lean into where we agree and where we can work together. And I would love any and all help when it comes to fentanyl and addiction and helping our veterans. And I think those are areas we can really work together.
And one last thing on incoming President Trump. He's repeatedly said a mass deportation operation is something he wants to bring. He's even, flirted with the idea of declaring an emergency to do this. What's your reaction to that? What can people in Albuquerque expect from this administration if that does move forward?
Well, conceptually, I think that would destroy our community. So, we know we have 20,000 folks who may or may not meet that criteria in Albuquerque, and they have family that has every right legally to be here or is born here. So, I do know last time what this meant was separating children from parents, and I will never support that. And our city resources will not in any way be used for that. And that is not only my choice, it's a value, but it's also city ordinance. So I think in Albuquerque, we're pretty clear where we're at and how we would handle this. But I will say this, if he declares martial law and brings in the military, obviously, I can't stop whatever tank he wants to mobilize. So, it's not lost on me. Some of this is about us holding our president accountable as opposed to asking the city what they're going to do about it.
Looking ahead to 2025 now, I'm curious, this is going to be your 8th year in office. As of now, the last of this term, what are some of your goals you're looking at as we head into this next year?
For us, it's all about following through after those big strides that we've made to take big chunks out of homelessness, out of crime, and also relatedly our housing crisis, and then continue to build places where we come together, like a third space beyond work and home, where we come together as a community and as a family, that we enjoy this wonderful city. And so that does mean next phases on the rail yards and the rail trail. It does mean continuing to do things like water fountains and new playgrounds and new parks. In fact, we're opening a huge one next year, the Phil Chacon renovation. So we're going to make sure, too, that we try and increase quality of life. But it's about taking those other crime stats and instead of going from, first to fifth worst in auto theft, getting to 10th and getting out of the top 10, right? Or it's about making sure that our homicides, instead of just going down a little bit, they're down 20%. So we're going to keep working on those. But we also want to invite everyone in the state to support that, especially through the state legislature, because we know having the burden and the responsibility, but also the blessing of having to lift up all of New Mexico, that's a lot. So that's why we're also reaching out to our legislators, other elected officials, because we know we can do this. We know what to do. We just got to do more of it next year.
All right, my last question for you. So 2025 mayoral election coming up. Can we expect to see your name on the ballot?
Yeah, it's no surprise. I think 2 years ago, I said that I will be asking voters for some more time, and it's to finish these big issues. You know, we are finally seeing traction to move forward, whether it's the community safety department, police reform, even the crime numbers finally going down, the Gateway Center, the stadium. All of that I want to see through, and I need a couple of more years to do it.
Thanks for watching Eye on New Mexico. Join us next Sunday morning as we look back at some of the biggest headlines in New Mexico in 2024. Have a great day.